Good morning, everyone, and welcome to TAM Lab number 51. Today, we're excited to have David Glading joining us here to basically show us how to migrate VMs from an on-prem environment to VMC on AWS, leveraging HCX. So I will stop sharing, and I'm going to hand it over to David, and you can take it away.
Great, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so hey, everybody. Thanks for joining today. For those who don't know me, my name's Dave Glading, a networking and security TAM based in the Tampa, Florida area. Been at VMware for about 5.5 years now. I came from the customer side and long-time listener, first-time caller to TAM Lab, so thanks for having me. Thanks to you guys for kind of putting on this great resource every week and making it available to our customers too. So what I'm going to do, as Steve mentioned, I'm going to spend probably the first half of this going over how you actually use HCX to migrate VMs to VMC, and also going to probably spend the second half walking you through how you can deploy VMs natively in VMC and AWS, how you set the firewall rules, NAT rules, public IPs, and expose it to the internet. So hopefully you folks will find that useful today. Give me a second. Okay, so someone confirm you can see my screen?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so just a quick overview. So this isn't designed to be like an overview session on VMC or HCX or NSX or anything like that, but I just wanted to kind of put a few kind of ideas out here about what we'll walk through today. So this is a typical VMC on AWS environment. You can see this kind of square over here is the actual VMware virtual private cloud that's managed by VMware. I've got my on-premises environment up to the top left. In this particular lab we're going to be leveraging today, we have a IPsec VPN between the on-premises environment and VMC. So for folks who probably might have some familiarity with NSXT, so VMC and AWS is leveraging NSXT, and similar to NSXT in an on-premises environment, we have an edge appliance here. This is just a logical representation. We have our kind of tier 0, which acts as kind of north-south here. And then we have the tier 1 gateways here. And the delineation is that the MGW is the management gateway. So this is all the environment that's managed for you as part of the service by VMware. So any networking that's required for the NSX managers, the edges, vCenter, Site Recovery Manager, if you use the DR extensions, that's all managed by VMware. What we're going to be focusing on today is the customer side of it. So I'll walk you through creating 3 different logical segments, one for web, one for app, one for DB, and a typical kind of 3-tier application. So with that, before we kind of get into that, as we discussed, let me show you how to actually start migrating virtual machines with HCX. So HCX is actually included as like a plugin to vCenter. So what I'm logged in to here is the vCenter on my on-premises environment. If I click the menu tab, you should see the HCX plugin is available for me. And I'll give you a quick overview. As I mentioned before, one of the previous TAM labs, I think it's TAM Lab 42, is now available on the YouTube channel. I think Raul Stephen did a great overview of HCX. So if you haven't seen HCX before, how do I configure it? How do I set it up? I definitely recommend you check out TAM Lab 42. But I'm going to assume you already kind of have at least an understanding of HCX. So you can see in this particular lab environment, in total here, we've had 107 virtual machines migrated. You get a representation over here. Here's my on-premises environment in Austin, and up here is my SDDC in the US West 2 region in Oregon. We kind of scroll down, I can see the site pairings here, and also over time, there's no current active migrations here, so we'll change that here in a moment. But in total, we've had 95 forward migrations, and this is the reverse migrations as well. So this is where, you know, as some of the testing with migrated VMs to VMC, we might test reverse migration back, etc. As Steve mentioned before, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to kind of unmute yourself, ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them during this session, or if not, point you to some resources where you can get those questions. So the site pairing, similar to if you're familiar with the Site Recovery Manager product, we pair HCX between the on-premises environment here in Austin, and here is the environment in VMC. We also we're leveraging HCX for layer 2 extension. So what you'll see, we can actually stretch a VLAN from the on-premises environment up to VMC. So we can seamlessly migrate VMs with vMotion with no downtime. They can retain the same IP address, etc. So here we have a VDS management. If I go over to, let me duplicate this tab. So if I look at if I go back in this tab to my networking, in my on-premises environment, we should see a port group here on the VDS called stretch VLAN. Okay. If I go back to HCX, I can see this is being stretched to a destination network, L2E stretch VLAN, and I won't repeat this number, but if I go to my VMC environment here, if I actually click on networking, that would help. You can see it's been stretched to here. So let me walk you through what that looks like to migrate a VM. So going back to HCX, let's start the migration process. You get a view of kind of any recent migrations. So you can see here I was doing some kind of validation last night, but in prepared for tonight, I can see I migrated a VM with vMotion back on the 24th, and last night I did a couple of bulk migrations. Basically, the main difference between vMotion and bulk migration, everybody's familiar with vMotion, right? It basically just takes the virtual machine from the source environment, moves it to the destination environment, requires the same layer 2 network to be available, etc. Whereas the bulk migration actually leverages VC replication. And this is what I have a customer using this quite heavily to migrate from. They're getting out of their on-premises data center actually to a new colo facility, and they're using HCX bulk migration to facilitate that at scale. And I'll walk you through it here. So I'm going to kick off a new bulk migration, and we'll also do a live vMotion here in a moment. What I'm showing you here as well, I'm just kind of showing you in the UI, but there is some Power CLI commandlets for HCX. You can write some scripts to kind of do this in a more automated fashion, but I'll just show it here in the UI. So what I'm going to do, you'll see here, I've got my source inventory on the left. This is my on-premises environment. If I scroll down, the ones I want to actually do for this demo, and you can filter up here. So I just type migrate, for example. It's going to take my VMs and just kind of show me what's in the filter. So I pick number 16 and 17. One thing you can also do, if you imagine if in an environment with like thousands of VMs, if I scroll back up here, there's an option to hide unselected. So that way then I've kind of cut out the noise and I'm only seeing the VMs I'm actually interested in migrating. So here's some of the options. This is where we're going to place the virtual machines on the destination side. And you see which ones are kind of mandatory. So I'm going to select the compute container. So what I'm actually seeing now, this is my environment in VMC and AWS. I'm going to move it to the migrate compute pool, resource pool, sorry. Storage. One thing that's slightly different from on-premises vSAN, we have a vSAN data store, but that's actually where the management components are housed, that are managed by VMware. So if I click on this, if I tried to do the migration, it would fail. It should give us a warning too, but I'm going to go ahead and select the workload data store, because that's the one where all the customer compute is hosted. I can also, if I want, specify here the destination folder. So I'm just going to put it in a predefined VMs migrated to cloud folder. Select that. And also, another powerful feature of HCX is some of the transformation we can do as virtual machines are migrated from like an on-premises environment to VMC. We can go between different VMware versions. I want to say it's all the way back to vSphere 5.0. So we could have an older VMware vSphere 5.0 environment, or we could migrate to the latest and greatest up in VMC and do some things that I'll get into in a minute, such as part of that process, upgrading VMware tools, virtual machine hardware, that kind of stuff. So rather than have to migrate the machines and go back and do some retrofitting, we can make that part of the migration process. Just one thing to bear in mind, if you did have a earlier version of vSphere on premises, if you migrated the virtual machine over to VMC and selected update virtual machine hardware, that would then make it problematic to move it back to the on-premises environment in the case of a problem, because you'd have an incompatibility there between the different versions of the virtual machine hardware. So just bear that in mind. Yeah.
Just a quick question. on open VMware tools.
Uh-huh.
Will that be upgraded as well?
It's a great question. I don't actually know the answer to that, so
okay, no problem.
I'll have to get back to you on.
I'll do a little research. Thanks.
Okay. And here's the different options for the switch over to, sorry, the migration over here is the options we have. So we either have vMotion, right, which is going to be a live migration with no downtime. There's bulk migration, which tends to be a common use case where you can, with vMotion, I believe we're limited to one vMotion operation at a time, whereas bulk migration can do multiple VMs at a time. And what this will do, think of it, it starts the migration process, but it's actually leveraging replication to move a lot of the bits. And the advantage here is, let's say you've got 10 VMs to move, or there's two in this example. It will start the migration. It will leverage vSphere replication to move the storage over, and you can specify when you want to do the cutover. So let me show you what that looks like. So when it comes to the switch over here, I can specify a switchover schedule. So let's say I have a maintenance window that starts on March the 27th at 10 p.m. HCX will go ahead, and I can specify as well, like it needs to be completed by 3 o'clock the next day, but I'm just going to leave it by default. What this will do, HCX will start migrating this machine. It will copy all the bits over, then it will just kind of sit in a wait stage until this maintenance window kicks in. So on the 27th of March at 10 p.m., HCX will do a final sync between the deltas. It will power off the source virtual machine in the on-premises environment. It will bring it up on VMC and AWS, and if I've specified some of the extended options like upgrading the tools, running a custom script, it will perform that work, and then it will power on the VM at the destination site. The source VM will be renamed, and it will have the NIC disconnected. So there's some kind of easy rollback if you need to. You just have to go back at a certain point and remove that virtual machine from the source environment. And it disconnects the NIC, so there's no issues with duplicate IP addresses, that kind of stuff. I'm just going to apply this. The end date. Okay, and we can force the power off the VM. So the person who's asking the question about open VMware tools, let's say if the VM didn't have VMware tools on it, HCX is always going to try and do a graceful shutdown, but if it can't, you can actually force the power off the source VM. We can remove any existing snapshots, force and unmount the ISO images, etc. By default, the retained MAC address is set. So when you migrate a VM, it's going to have the same MAC. We look at some of these extended options. If we wanted to, I could upgrade the virtual machine hardware, the VMware tools. If I wanted to customize the DNS, generate a new SID. I can also run a pre-customization or post-customization script in the command line here. I'm going to leave those off for now. Let's go ahead and start this. And just bear in mind, this is like a lab environment too, so might not be as fast as a real kind of on-premises environment. Yeah.
Sorry, one question. Are there any of the 3 migration options, vMotion, bulk, or what was the other one? Are those dependent you have an extended network? Any of those on an extended network?
Yeah. So the other type of I forgot to mention, I'm glad you mentioned that, was the replicator-assisted vMotion, which kind of takes a regular vMotion and adds the power of vSphere replication to it, but it's like a non-disruptive way to do it. I mean, technically you don't have to have a layer 2 network stretch, but you probably want to have that done for the vMotion and the replication-assisted vMotion, because you're going to have, like in this example I'll do shortly, I've got a VM that's actually on the stretch network, so you can do a live migration without having to reapply the IP address and moving it to a different subnet. So that can be seamless, especially if you might have an application that, for whatever reason, maybe it was developed a few years ago. There's one guy who developed it, and they left the company. Nobody wants to change the IP address in case it breaks. That's definitely a good option to leverage at that point.
If I may ask another question about the extended network. there any way to add redundancy, or is there a single point of failure?
With the network extension, the way it works, I know definitely on the on-premises version of HCX, you can have multiple appliances, but it's no redundancy between the two. It's more for kind of load balancing. So when you actually extend a network, if you select that as part of the HCX deployment, it deploys different virtual machines that actually facilitate that layer 2 tunnel. HCX does it for you. There's no physical network changes you need to do. And so, you know, whatever ESXi host at the source is running that virtual machine is what establishes the tunnel. You can add additional appliances for more kind of throughput, but not for redundancy.
So following on that question, with the extending a network, right, you've got a stretch layer 2 now. Is it best practice to just use that for the migration and then tear it down after, or is it something that could potentially be left in place forever, right? If you've got VMs moving back and forth.
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of it depends who you ask that question to. You might get different answers. Look, the way I look at it, I kind of tell my customers to do it more on like a temporary basis, right? If you had multiple workloads you were going to migrate, you'd extend the network for that particular application, you'd migrate it over, do some testing, maybe leave it up and running for a bit just in case you need to fall back, and at that point then unstretch the network. I believe at this point, I can't remember if VMC supports proximity routing. So what happens if you stretch that network between the on-premises environment and VMC, even if you migrate every VM over to VMC, to get out to the default gateway, the traffic would have to hairpin or trombone back to on-premises. So that's probably a good reason there why you wouldn't want to leave it there long term.
Right.
So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to, because right now it's going to wait until March, I'm going to go ahead and reschedule this switchover.
Yeah, we don't have enough time
here
to wait till March.
Yeah, that'd be a long recording. I'm not think anybody would stick around to the end of that. So I'm going to ignore the failover window here and start the migration as soon as possible. All right. So this is probably going to take a few minutes. Last time when I was doing it, these were taking like 10, 15 minutes. So I'm going to leave these running, and in the meantime, do a live migration here. Then we'll switch to the focusing more on the firewall side. So bear with me a second. Okay, so you can see now it's been updated for these two. Another option with HCX as well as part of the plugin, rather than, if you choose to, rather than coming into the HCX plugin and doing this migration, if I just want to do a live migration, let me find a good VM here, bear with me a second. Let's pick number 20. Let me, I think it was, I'm not sure, it might have been, oops. Let me try pinging this guy. Okay, ping 2, 7. Okay, I'm going to leave a constant ping running against this guy. And one thing we'll do with the HCX plugin as well, if I wanted to, I could right-click him and say HCX actions, and now I've got the option to migrate, and I can do it directly from here, complete with the context of this VM. So now I don't have to go into the HCX plugin and drill down to find migrate VM20. What I'm going to do this time, so here's the other one I mentioned before. Somebody had a question about which ones are available. There's a replication assisted vMotion too. So this one here, I'm just going to do a live vMotion. Again, you have to select this too. Great. And this one should be workload. I'm going to leave it saying source, destination folder. I'm not sure why I'm getting that warning, but I'm going to proceed. So now I figure that's the HCX window here. Okay, so I can see over here, you see already the 16 and 17, 100%. They've already completed the migration as far as a replication perspective. It's now kind of doing the final steps, which would involve powering off the VM at the source site, syncing the deltas and powering it on. But just in the interest of time, I'm going to leave these running because I want to make sure we get enough time to look at some of the firewalling stuff as well. So we'll leave this running, and we'll come back later in the session today just to see what's happening with this. I'll leave this ping running too. Just like a regular vMotion in the on-premises environment, we should only probably lose one packet just as the VM is being quiesced and kind of brought online on the destination side. So now let's kind of go back to the diagram here for a second. Where we go. So what we're going to walk through now, just in the interest of time, I've already deployed these 3 virtual machines on VMC. So I've got like a TAM Lab Web 01, App 01, and DB 01, but I haven't actually configured the networking as yet. So I'm going to walk you through that step by step. One thing that will be kind of new to you if you haven't seen VMC on AWS much, because NSX, the infrastructure is managed by VMware as part of the service, right? That's one of the advantages. You know, we patch it, we update it, we manage it for you. You're really using NSX as a consumer. So on an on-premises environment, you'd log into the NSXT UI, you'd create your logical segments. We don't expose the NSXT UI to you. So what we actually do, we actually show that to you. I'm going to sign out. Let me sign back into the cloud console. So you do all that via the SDDC console. So I'm logging into that here in a second. So I'm going to VMware Cloud Services. I'll find VMware Cloud and AWS. So any networking I'm going to perform in this window here, and we'll walk through that together. Again, there's lots of environments I pointed to. I think I heard by Jorge on the call earlier. So he has there's a great hands-on lab that kind of walks you through VMC and AWS in detail. I definitely recommend you go check that out to get a complete overview. But if you look at networking and security, what I'm going to do first off is I'm going to create these segments. So again, just going back here, we're going to create a TAM Lab Web, TAM Lab App, and TAM Lab DB.
Hey, Dave. Quick question, and it's a little kind of off topic, but do we have the ability to create additional T1 routers as well, or are we just bound to that one that we get?
Yeah, you basically have the north-south edge, you have the management gateway, and you have the compute gateway. I don't believe you have an option to add additional Tier 1s at that point.
Okay, thank you.
So this is kind of key here. We've got routed. So extended would be like if it's outside and it's stretched or it's disconnected. I'm just going to select router at this point. And kind of similar to when you create a segment in NSXT, I'm actually going to specify the gateway IP here. So in this environment, I'm going to have 172.16.10.1/24. I'm going to leave DHCP disabled, but there's an option to enable DHCP if you choose to, and you can specify the ranges in here. So let me start a new command window actually. Okay, so you can actually see there was the timeout on the vMotion, so it's probably up at the other side now. We'll come back and check that later. I'm going to launch a new command window and validate that. And just one thing I forgot to mention earlier, this machine I'm actually connected to is a Horizon View desktop that's actually within the VMC on AWS environment. So this ping I'm about to run, you wouldn't regularly be able to do this without creating some firewalls. The default east-west firewall policy that will show you here shortly is blacklist, which means that any traffic is permitted unless you choose to deny it. And I'll show you that here in the UI shortly. But let me start pinging this gateway. It should get no response. Okay. Now, if I go over here, so I've created TAM Lab Web segment. I've given it this IP address. I'm going to save it. And now it's starting to ping, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Let me go ahead and create the 2 other ones. TAM Lab App type. Again, this is going to be routed. Going to give it the gateway prefix here, 172.16.20. Any of you eagle-eyed viewers who recognize these segments, and some of us probably done a hands-on lab a number of times. So I'm using the same virtual machines and subnets that are used in the hands-on lab environment for the traditional kind of free tier app that we demonstrate in there. The last one here is going to be TAM Lab DB.
And so that ping that you have in the background, that was just pinging the gateway, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I was thinking at first, like you're pinging a VM on that subnet or that segment, but
yeah,
you just created it.
that's the only yeah, and that's the only reason it's working for me is because I'm already inside the VMC and AWS environment. If my jump box was on an on-premises environment, I'd obviously have to configure the necessary rules on the gateway firewall.
Right.
You know, this router up here, and I'll show you that here shortly. Okay, so we've created the 3 segments now. So the next step is I need to go ahead and attach the virtual machine to these newly created networks. So we go back to my VMC vCenter server. So I already pre-deployed these. As far as deploying new virtual machines, you have the option, you can import and set up traditional VMware templates. You could have a content library on your source environment. You can then have VMC and AWS subscribe to it just to make the deployment of templates a lot more simpler. Just for want of time, I'm assuming everyone in this call has probably deployed a virtual machine before, so I don't want to waste too much time going through that. I've already deployed these three virtual machines. So if we pick the web server first, I'm going to edit the settings. I'm going to place this on the... And as soon as I create a new segment in the Cloud Console, it should become available to be consumed as an opaque network within vCenter. So here we go. So here's the TAM Lab web. I'm going to connect this guy to that. Repeat it for DB and place this on the DB segment. App. There we go. Okay. Let's review what we've done so far. So we've created these 3 logical networks. We've attached these virtual machines to it, and they just happen to, I've already configured them with the necessary IP addresses. So the web VM, I think, is like 10.12, and the app is like 20.11, and the DB is 30.11. Okay. So I'm going to start creating some of the firewalls now. And again, the way we facilitate that all is via the actual VMC and AWS interface here in the Cloud Console. So but before I do that, I always find it best practice to leverage like tags, security tags to build my rules with. So I'm going to go ahead and create some tags for these VMs. So if I filter this list again by TAM, I can type TAM. Okay, I guess already predefined. I forgot I created these already. Let me cancel this out here. So I'm going to give this a tag of web. The scope is optional too. Just think of that as like another container. Like if you had different departments, you could have like an HR scope, and it'd be web, finance, web, HR, web, etc. I'm just going to leave this as web for now. One key thing as well is this kind of called me out a couple of times. Even though I've added it here, you have to click this plus over here for it to take effect. Otherwise, you'll hit save and the tag won't apply. So make sure you don't forget to click this plus over here. I'm going to repeat that for DB. Just ignore the fact they already have tags. That was just me doing some testing last night. Create this DB tag. And what we're going to use these tags for is the foundation. See, I did it myself 2 seconds after I said it. You notice we've got 0 tags. I didn't hit the little plus icon on the right here.
Everyone's watching. That's why.
Yeah, I actually did it. I actually did it on purpose to show you what it looks like.
Oh, that's
that's a
good idea. Yeah.
And TAM Lab App. Again, I'm just going to give this a tag called app. And one thing, if anybody's familiar with like NSX or vSphere, the way tagging works in NSXT is a little bit different. In NSX or vSphere, the tag would actually be its own distinct object, and you'd associate that with like virtual machines. Wherein, as in NSXT, it's more of like metadata associated with the object itself. Or I'm actually going into this object and manually typing in what the tag is. So they're slightly different. So if you're familiar with NSX or vSphere, you just have to just be familiar with that. Okay.
You did it again.
So, I told us easy to do.
I was watching it like, he's not really going to do it again, is he?
Yeah. I was just seeing if anybody's paying attention. There you go.
Dave, are these tags visible from vCenter in any way?
No. These tags specifically are, I believe, let's have a look. I don't think they are. Let's look at. Let me look at one. Yeah, so I'm not seeing the tags. Kind of going back to what I was mentioning about NSX or vSphere, right? You'd go in, you'd see the security tags associated with it, but because this is NSXT, the only tags you're going to see in vSphere are going to be vSphere specific tags. These are two distinct objects. Good question.
Yeah.
Now what I'm going to do, so I've got the virtual machines, I've added them to the segment, I've created the tags. My next step, I'm just basically going to create some groups that I can then leverage within the distributed firewall or the east-west firewall that we'll get to in a second. I'm going to click on add groups here. And I'm going to call this Lab Web. I've got the option to set members. So right now I'm going to add the criteria. So I've got virtual machine. I could do segment port, IP set, name, OS name. So I could create rules based on operating system like Windows 2003. Or if all my virtual machines for development start with dev, I could do things like that. I'm going to use tag. I'm going to create tag. And guess what? The tag's going to be called web. If you remember, I left the scope blank, so I'm going to ignore that. And in this instance, you don't have to hit the X. If you hit the plus, it's just going to produce another line. So I'm going to apply that. I might have to speed up here. Okay. Save. Now, if I go back to my TAM Lab Web, if I click View Members, here's my TAM Lab Web virtual machine because that's tagged with the web tag. Okay. So bear with me a second. I'm just going to quickly create a couple more groups here. Just following the same process for app. Obviously, I'm going to select the group criteria is going to be tag app. Then Lab DB. Hopefully you're getting the idea here.
Is this case sensitive?
I'm not sure.
Can you test it?
Yeah, let's see. Let me check this. I think I created the tag as uppercase.
You can check the members after.
Yeah. No, it's not okay. It looks like it's not.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to create one more that's going to be encompassing all of them. So bear with me a second. I'm going to need this for my drop rule that we'll get to later. So I've created a group for the 3 separate tiers. Now I'm going to create one for so you can imagine in a larger environment, this is where you want to start using some of your scopes, just in case you have multiple different webs, for different customers or different business units. Okay, so this should encompass all 3 of my TAM Lab VMs, if I can talk. So before I move on to the distributed firewall rules, let's just do some validation. So I've got the TAM Lab all. If I click on View Members, okay, app DB web. I can see the associated IP addresses as well. I've got TAM Lab App, which should just have the one app machine. DB. Okay. And web. Okay. Everybody clear so far?
So far, so good.
Okay. So I'm going to move across to the distributed firewall now, right? The distributed firewall. So I mentioned before the reason I could ping it. If I click over here, the default connectivity strategy for the DFW is blacklist. So all traffic is allowed unless specifically denied. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm going to create a new policy. So if you're familiar with NSXT already, this should look very familiar. You know, it's the exact same way that you'd create it on premises. So I'm going to call the policy TAM Lab. I'm just going to add 4 rules to it. Oops, I don't want to slow that one. I'm just in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit quick. But if you've got any questions, please shout out. So I'm going to source of any. And so now I should start to be able to leverage the groups we set up earlier. So here's I'm going to allow traffic to the web servers on HTTPS. Okay. And the next step is I need to allow traffic between my web tier and my application tier. And one thing I love about this UI, you can just, if you've already got pre-existing objects in here, you can just drag and drop them to make it a little bit easier there. Okay, so select my app server. Sorry, slight delay connecting to this environment. It's like double keying sometimes. So in a second. Already, in the interest of time, I went ahead and created a custom service for this app. It happens to use 8443 between the web and the app tier. So I created this one ahead of time. Okay. So then we need to have our app to DB, right? Is this making sense? Is there any questions? Is this pretty clear, Steve? Anybody got any questions in the chat or anything?
No questions.
Or anything, but...
Feel free to unmute yourself if you do have a question, but yeah,
cool.
It's clear so far.
While you're running through it, I'll add, I think it's pretty cool that you can, like you just had that TAM Lab web and you just copied it right over to the next line without having to come into the interface, just drag it over. That was really, nice UI.
Yes.
Feature there.
Yeah, I think I added that in some of the later versions of NSX for vSphere, and I think it's been in NSXT since day one. I think so. That's nice.
Yeah.
I won't go. It's out of scope for today, but in a production environment, you definitely want to leverage this applied to field as well, which kind of limits the scope of where the rules are applied to, because otherwise your rule base can grow exponentially. And then I'm going to have the block rule down the bottom. So I'm going to segment this app, right? So just to review, we're going to allow any access to the web server on HTTPS. We're going to allow the web to talk to app on the app port, and the app to talk to the DB, which just happens to be HTTPS. So usually, this would be like a SQL port or something like that. But then final rule down here is TAM Lab all. There we go. Actually, before I publish this, I meant to do this. Let me show you that I should be able to. So beforehand, I was able to ping the gateway, if you recall from earlier in the demonstration. Come on, this control C not working. So at this point, I should be able to ping the web server, which I believe is 10.12. Okay. And again, that's because I'm inside the environment. We'll see that change here when I publish this. I'm going to change the drop rule. So any traffic that isn't specific to the application, anything else that's hitting this TAM Lab group, I'm going to drop it. Okay. So if I wanted to, you can also, just like NSXT on-prem, you can kind of disable the rules and enable them. So if you had a change window that's 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, you could predefine all your rules, set them as disabled, come in here and enable them and push them when your change window opens. But I'm going to go ahead and publish. So now, it's all being well, this ping should fail. So let's see. Sweet. Okay.
Hey, Dave, quick question.
Yeah.
Not really technical, but this whole distributed firewall functionality within VMC, is this an add-on service or is it just out of the box?
Good question. No, it's included with your VMC and AWS subscription.
Awesome.
Please.
Okay.
Like, I'm not the sales guy, but I'm 99% sure that's correct. But, so I've got this bookmark up here, so you can see here's my 172.16.10.12. Click on this. Voila. Okay, so if anybody is still with me, so what I've done so far, I've enabled this communication internally with VMC, right? So my next step would be, let's imagine this is a external facing customer database that I need to expose. What I need to do now, there's a couple more steps. I need to request a public IP. So if I go down to public IPs, I can see the public IPs that are associated with my SDDC. Just bear in mind, again, I'm a TAM, right, so I'm post-sales, but I believe there is an associated charge with public IPs, I believe, so just bear that in mind. So I'm going to request a new one, and I'm going to call this TAM Lab. So right away, I've been given an external IP address, okay, 54.245.8.81. So the next step is to create a net rule, right? Because I want any traffic that's going to hit that 54. Let me go back to you. So any traffic that's coming in from the internet that kind of comes into VMC on that 54 address as the destination, I want to map that to the address of my web server down here. So that's what we're going to do now. Another nice thing I like in the UI as well, so let's give this a name called TAM Lab. If I click this public IP, I don't have to remember what that IP address was. If I click the drop down, it's got all the ones. If you recall, I added the TAM Lab label. Oh, what's going on here? That was that. Okay. Public port, I'm going to leave as any for now, but you could specifically just say only NAT traffic, like on HTTP, HTTPS. I'm going to tell it what IP address I want to NAT to. Okay. And if I want to log the NAT as well, I can do that as well. So now, anything coming in from the outside that hits this 54 address, the edge is going to perform some NAT and translate that to 172.16.10, which is my internal address of the web server, right? So just going back to the diagram real quick. So we had we've got the CGW. So all the traffic within here is covered by the east-west firewall. To allow traffic from external, internal to the environment, we have to define those as gateway firewall rules. So I now need to allow external access to the web server, right? I've already done it. Let's kind of revisit that. On the distributed firewall, I've already allowed any traffic to hit the web server, but now I have to recreate that on the north-south firewall. So let's add a new rule, TAM Lab Web. So source is going to be anything, so it could be anything on the internet. My destination, a key point here is, even though this is a gateway firewall, you want to set the destination to be the internal IP address, because NAT is performed before firewall rule processing. So you might think to yourself, I'd need to make the destination the 54 external IP, but it's actually, you need to set it to the internal IP address. So in this example, I can just select the TAM Lab Web, apply, publish.
I actually
So
thought
with this
for one moment that you would have to select the public IP as the source.
No, because I want to allow any traffic. So, right, if I'm exposing this customer database to the internet, I've got no idea, if it's external customers, I don't know what IP address they're coming from. So I need to, in this particular example, I'm just going to allow. I need to change this to HTTPS actually. I don't want to allow anything to it. Because the NAT translation takes part before the firewall rules, the NAT is applied, then the firewall rule processing takes place. That's why I've done this as the internal IP. And I can see that if I click on it, I can validate that it's over here. Now the way my lab is set up, because I'm already inside of VMC, I'm not going to be able to hit the external IP, so you'll have to kind of take my word for it. If you have a problem, if it takes a few minutes, it could just be that the routes have to be advertised via BGP. It should be automatic, but it might take a few moments before you can hit this web server from the outside. But if I was external, I should now be able to hit that. Then that takes place, and I can connect to my internal web server now.
Hey, Dave.
Okay, so with that, yeah.
Quick question. Let's say we had 2 web servers, so we need a load balancer. And I know we probably don't have time to cover this completely in depth, but just what would we do? What would you do?
Good question. I could be wrong. I probably have to check with like a VMC team, but I don't see any options in here for a load balancer. So it's not like with NSXT on premises, you could define a load balancer, you attach it to your tier 1 gateway, and you could do load balancing. I believe you'd have to use
bring your own.
Some kind of virtual appliance or something. I believe so, yeah. I don't know if anybody else
What's under add-ons?
That's my understanding. This would be like the disaster recovery service and HCX.
Gotcha. Okay.
So this one has HCX, but I don't have the site recovery. That's available as an additional purchase.
Just give them your credit card.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fine.
Use my corporate card.
There you go.
Okay. So before we go back to check on the state of our migration, is there any questions about the gateway firewall, the differences between the distributed firewall, how you take groups? Hopefully I've cleared some things up for everybody now. Okay, cool. Okay, let me proceed. So one thing I'll do afterwards, I mentioned there's a charge around this, so I'll go through and clean this up afterwards. And if you're ever doing any testing, make sure you remember to go back and release your public IP. And the way you do that, this is one I was playing about with yesterday. I can go in here, I can release the IP, and it's gone right away. Okay, so let's go back to our environment now. And here
sorry, real quick, when you release that IP, would it also remove the NAT rule if you had one?
Well, good question. So that one I didn't happen to use. I think because I'm going to try, if I try and release this, it should give me a warning that I'm using this in a NAT rule and it won't let me. So let's test that. Yeah, there we go. So you can't delete it because it's already used by this NAT rule. So I'd have to go and, as part of my cleanup process, I'd delete the NAT rule. Then I'd come in here and release the IP.
Yep. Cool.
So if you remember, let's look at this one first. So the migrate VM20 was actually a vMotion operation. Do I still have the ping running? I might have killed actually. Excuse me. There's a slight delay sometimes when I. That's finished. So I should see this in my. If I go back to my VMC vCenter, I should see now. What was it? 18. I think I put in this folder. Oh, sorry, it's 20. It's been a long week. Yeah, so here's my migrate VM20. It's been successfully migrated. And if you recall, it was on the stretch VLAN on premises, and it's been migrated over here to the layer 2 stretch. So I think to the question earlier, in order to have a seamless vMotion, you need to have that layer 2 network stretched across. Otherwise, after you vMotion it, you'd have to go in, you'd lose connectivity, and you'd have to re-IP it. And let me show you what it looks like as far as the bulk migration. So if you recall, we bulk migrated like 16 and 17. So as well as seeing these in, I think I chose if I go back to my folder view, migrate into cloud. Ignore these two, that was some tests I was doing last night, but here's the VMs like VM 16 and 17. And if I go back to my on-premises vCenter, go back to the VM view, so I've got this folder here, VMs migrated to cloud. Here were the original source VMs. When the bulk migration finished, they were shut down. It's appended with this kind of number on the end. And if I edit this, you'll see there's no network connected to it right now. But what I could do, HCX supports the reverse migration. So let's say I migrate these over. It's 2 o'clock on a Saturday. It's my maintenance window. For whatever reason, after they migrated, we lost connectivity. There's some networking issue. Somebody forgot to do a firewall rule somewhere like that. And, you know, you're getting towards the end of your change window. You haven't been able to troubleshoot and fix the problem, you know, and your manager tells you you need to back out and go back to on-premises while you do some additional troubleshooting. Because we've still got the source VM on-premises, we'll actually, when we do the reverse migration, it'll still take account for the source data that's been there. So if it's only been 30 minutes, it just has to do a delta of the last 30 minutes worth of changes to be able to recover back on site. So that's a pretty cool feature as well. So I think that was pretty much what I wanted to show you today. Just to recap, we did one live vMotion, we did a couple of bulk migrations, and then spent the majority of the time kind of walking you through just a real kind of introduction, I guess, at how you would set up some of the NAT rules, the firewall rules, the grouping, to be able to implement micro-segmentation in VMC. I think we're kind of coming right up on time, so if I'll hand it back to you, Steve. Any questions that are left, or anything else you want me to show you in the couple of minutes that remain?
Yeah, so there's no questions at the moment. For those of you still on, feel free to unmute yourself or put things in the chat. I do have a question for you though, David. So the replication assisted vMotion option, can you speak to that, why we would want to do that, and then what additional requirements we would need to install and set that up would be helpful? Yeah.
So I think that's part of the service. When it's activated, it becomes an option. If it was independent of VMC, let's say you're using HCX on premises to go from a legacy data center to a new SDDC, I believe you'd need to have the Enterprise Edition, which is an add-on to HCX Advanced. But again, check with your account team on that. But the advantage of this, it kind of combines. You think of it, it takes the best of vMotion and bulk migration and combines them into one. So you could migrate multiple VMs at a time, and think of it as giving it like a boost with replication. If there's a lot of deltas going on, a lot of disk changes, a lot of memory changes, you know, you could leverage the replication to kind of speed that process up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you wouldn't have to do things like deploy vSphere replication to leverage this. It's just
Correct.
Another service part of, but you would need HCX Enterprise. Okay.
Yeah. If I go back to the HCX, let me see if I can show it to you. Look at my on-premises environment here. Trying to remember where it is. You have what's called the when you set up HCX.
Yeah. And
it's a lot simpler with VMC because a lot of it's deployed for you. You know, it's deployed as a service, and you just download an OVA and deploy it on the on-premises side. But you create what's called a service mesh, and as part of that, here's all the different services that are available to you. So in an on-prem environment, some of these are optional. So the interconnect, WAN optimization, deduplication, which you didn't really get into. And again, I point folks to the other TAM Lab session on that, but one of these should be replication assisted vMotion. So that's one of the requirements. You'd have to have that set up. And that deploys like each one of these. A lot of these tend to be a separate virtual appliance. If I go over here, we should see where these are. Okay, so actually you get different virtual appliances. I can't remember, I think it might have been Jorge was asking before about network extension. When you enable the interconnect is the IX appliance, so that's always on. If you enable network extension, that's a different virtual appliance as well. So I believe the WAN optimization, the replication assisted vMotion, it would all be handled by the interconnect appliance, I believe.
Gotcha. That makes it easy.
Okay.
Cool. Anybody else got any questions? We got about 30 seconds left. All right. Well, this has been extremely valuable. So thank you, Dave. I have a customer that's about to embark on a VMC journey. So this helps
Perfect.
answer a lot of questions for me, definitely. So thank you.
So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Steve.
All
And
right.
team.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week and a good weekend. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.